don't know what's better, to have this freaking drooping like it's a sad flower, or what the? It's so annoying. We're going with the weird third option. This is not going to work. I don't know how people do this for a living. Okay, I think we nailed it. Hi, my name's Crystal. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of California, Texas, and Maine, and I'm here to talk to you about why autism in women goes way under recognized. Just as a disclaimer, this is not a substitute for mental health treatment, and you watching this video does not constitute a therapist-client relationship. I can't believe that has to be said, but it actually has to be said. So as an LCSW, I perform clinical adult autism assessments, and it is always so interesting to me, as someone who came to a diagnosis late in life as well, how many symptoms will let pile up and then just be like, oh, this is just stress, or this is just anxiety, or this is just depression. For myself, I sought a clinical autism assessment when I reached a place where my medications for depression were like helping me to maintain, but wasn't doing anything beyond that. And I still didn't feel great. Of course, this was also in 2022 when we were still in COVID precautions and the world was all over the place. So in my clinical work, the most common signs that bring people in to get an adult autism assessment are things like burnout. They're exhausted. It's fatigue at this point. It's not even exhaustion. They've lost interest in going out to social events. And in addition, they've also been to therapy, one-on-one individual, for some length of time to treat anxiety and depression. And they've gotten to a point where they feel a little bit better, but they feel like they've plateaued and they don't know what else to look into. And then they saw a video or someone's talked to them about, hey, do you think maybe autism might be a part of your mental health journey? And they hadn't before. And so then that's how they end up coming to me. But those are super common signs in high masking women. So in terms of patterns of high masking women, we usually see that they were or are high achievers. They're very good at pushing through exhaustion and pushing past body signs that they need to slow down or they need to take a break. There's a lack of awareness with knowing when they need to slow down. Ask me how I know. And so they keep pushing through. And so the burnout just keeps getting worse and their overwhelm starts to mount. And so the chronic stress of all of the demands that they have in their life, they can't keep up with that. For me, COVID lockdown was the thing that put me over that threshold. My brain couldn't compensate anymore. And I was on an antidepressant and I had reached a point where I was like, I don't want to up that dosage. I want to figure out what is actually going on in addition to being in a global pandemic. And I read a book or heard from a friend something about this, something about neurodivergence, ADHD, autism. I had never considered it for myself. And the more I read about it, the more research I did, the more these symptoms and these traits and these patterns resonated for me. In my clinical work and research on late diagnosed autistic women, there are a lot of patterns that show up in addition to being high achieving. Some, they've had a full childhood where they were really gifted, or they've had the opposite experience where school was really hard for them. We see a lot of overlap with ADHD and autism and learning disabilities and learning disorders. And so sometimes they've either learned how to learned how to compensate through that and have multiple graduate degrees, or they had a really hard time in college or had a really hard time in school and barely made it through high school, maybe started college and then dropped out. So it can be one of those two extremes. One of the other things that I've noticed in these patterns for late diagnosed autistic women or people that come to me wanting to be evaluated for autism is that they also start to notice that sensory things start to bother them a lot more. Those are usually like the first things that we notice. And usually throughout childhood and throughout their adolescence and throughout their adult life, either one, they hide that those sensory things are overwhelming them. They've learned how to mask them really well, or they have just thought that they were quirky, or a lot of times other family members experience those same sensory sensitivities. And so for them, contextually, it was normal. And so sometimes they'll have a collection of times when it's been presented to them that might not be typical. And so they start to go, oh, especially if they are a parent, they will be like, when my kids come home from school, or if they're little, like 3 o'clock on till bedtime, I am just like desperately trying to get to bedtime. Every moment is agonizing. I'm texting my partner to see when they're going to be home, especially if they are the primary caregiver for these. That was me. I had to, and still sometimes have to, wear AirPods with no music, noise cancellation on, or I use loops to varying degrees of noise quieting, because the sense of the auditory input is so much for my system. I can't concentrate. And for me, my main symptom was irritability. And that presented in just like a constant irritation of feeling frustrated that anyone was asking anything of me. And my kids are my kids. That's what kids do. I have a partner who is 100% an additional parent with me. We are two full grown adults in a space. I just couldn't deal with all of the sensory input. And so that was part of one of the things that like was an aha moment for me to dive deeper into this. One of the other patterns that we'll see in clinical evaluation, one of the other patterns that I see when I do clinical evaluations is a pattern of rigid thinking, which serves people really well when they are high achieving or career oriented people, because if you don't waver from what you need to do, you can go full speed ahead and move people out of your way if it's not something that they're on board with. But they'll start to encounter relationship dynamics that aren't working anymore or aren't serving them because they have a really difficult time with rigid thinking. And the way that I approach these clinical interviews and assessments is neuroaffirming first and foremost. So none of this is ever evaluated through a lens of you need to fix this. It's always evaluated through a lens of this is a pattern that occurs for you in thinking. So how does that affect your life? Do you want to change how that affects do you want to change how that impacts you? Or are you okay with that trait in yourself and the way that it plays out in your relationship dynamics? We won't ever shame somebody for doing that. I still, to this day, recognize when my rigid thinking is kicking in. And my husband will give me a gentle reminder, will say, hey, I think this might be a situation, you think this might be a situation where your thinking is a little bit more inflexible. And that's a cue to me to go, oh, is this actually a hill that I want to die on? Or am I just having a really hard time transitioning from this activity to this activity, or from thinking it needs to be done this way and that's the only right way of doing it? Or is it okay for me to consider there might be another way of doing it? Sometimes it can be hard when you are socialized to defer to other people or see things through one lens, especially if your family, quote, always did it that way. It can be really hard to move from that space of being like, no, that's the correct and right way to do it, versus, okay, is there actually an alternative way that actually might benefit my close personal relationships and doesn't actually make that big of a difference if I change it in the end? But in the moment, our brains are screaming, no, this is what you have to do. So the clinical autism assessment, if this resonated for you and you want more information about how and when and where I conduct those clinical assessments, you can go to my website, getpsychtherapy.com, and either book a free consult to see if that might be a fit for you, or you can go to getpsychtherapy.com and discover the different groups that I run, different resources that I offer, and join my mailing list in case you want to stay up to date on future offerings.